When Reba Mcentire heard a street cleaner singing, the world stopped to see what happened next. The streets of Nashville held secrets that most people would never discover. At 4:30 in the morning, when the city still dreamed of tomorrow's possibilities, Maria Lopez was already walking through those empty streets with a determination that had been forged by 12 years of rising before dawn. Her weathered work boots echoed against the silent pavement as she pushed her cleaning cart down Music Row, the heart of country music's empire. What no one could have imagined was that this humble street sweeper possessed a voice so powerful, so haunting, that it would soon shake the very foundations of the music industry and change everything anyone thought they knew about dreams, dignity, and second chances. Maria had learned long ago that life rarely offered fairy tale endings to women like her. At 42, she had the kind of weathered beauty that spoke of countless struggles overcome and dreams carefully tucked away for the sake of survival. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her city-issued uniform had faded from years of washing, but there was something in her deep brown eyes that revealed an unquenchable fire burning within. Every morning, as she walked through the streets where music legends had built their careers, she carried with her a secret that would have stunned anyone who bothered to really listen. The irony was not lost on her that she spent her days cleaning the sidewalks outside the very studios where her musical heroes recorded their masterpieces. Music Row was lined with buildings that housed the dreams of thousands, and Maria knew every inch of those streets better than the artists who drove past her in their expensive cars. She had memorized the addresses of every record label, every studio, every music publisher. She knew which building housed the offices of her idol, Reba Mcentire's management company, and she had swept those particular sidewalks with extra care for years, as if somehow her devotion might seep through the concrete and reach the woman whose music had sustained her through the darkest moments of her life. But Maria's story was far more complex than anyone who saw her working could ever guess. Born in Guadalajara, Mexico, she had come to Nashville at 18 with nothing but a battered guitar and a heart full of songs. Her parents, Manuel and Rosa Lopez, had worked multiple jobs to give their daughter a chance at the American dream, and Maria had arrived in Tennessee with their blessings and their life savings sewn into the lining of her only suitcase. She had spent her first months in Nashville sleeping in a friend's garage, auditioning for every small venue that would listen, and slowly building a reputation in the city's underground music scene. Those early years had been filled with promise. Maria's voice was unlike anything the local club owners had heard before, a rich, powerful instrument that could handle the technical demands of country music while carrying the emotional depth of her Mexican heritage. She could make grown men cry with her interpretation of a heartbreak ballad, and she could get an entire room dancing with her spirited renditions of classic country anthems. The managers of several small venues had started booking her regularly, and there had been talk of introducing her to some industry connections. For a brief, shining moment, it had seemed like her dreams might actually come true. Then, life happened the way it often does to women who dare to dream too big. At 21, Maria fell in love with James Richardson, a charming construction worker who promised her the world and delivered heartbreak instead. When she became pregnant with their first child, James had sworn he would be different from his own absent father. He had held her hand during doctor's appointments and talked about the family they would build together. But when their son Carlos was born, James discovered that the reality of fatherhood was far more challenging than the romantic idea of it. Within 6 months, he was gone, leaving Maria with a newborn, no steady income, and dreams that suddenly seemed impossibly selfish. 2 years later, history repeated itself with devastating precision. Maria had met David Torres at a community center where she occasionally performed at local events. David seemed more mature, more stable than James had been. He claimed to love her music and promised to support her career even as they built a family together. When Maria became pregnant with their daughter Sophia, David assured her that this time would be different. But when Sophia was born with complications that required extensive medical care, David couldn't handle the pressure. He disappeared one night, leaving behind only a note saying he was sorry and a stack of unpaid medical bills that would haunt Maria for years to come. Suddenly, Maria found herself a single mother of 2 young children, with no family nearby and no safety net to catch her fall. The small venues that had once welcomed her could no longer accommodate her schedule. She couldn't perform at night when her children needed her at home. and she couldn't afford childcare on the unpredictable income of a struggling musician. The dream that had brought her to Nashville began to feel like a cruel joke, a fantasy that belonged to a different version of herself, a woman who didn't have two small faces depending on her for everything. The transition from aspiring musician to city employee hadn't happened overnight. Maria had tried to hold on to her dreams, even as reality closed in around her. She had worked various day jobs, waiting tables, cleaning offices, stocking shelves, while trying to find time to write songs and practice her guitar. But as the years passed and her children grew, the demands of single motherhood left less and less room for music in her life. The guitar that had once been her most precious possession began to gather dust in the corner of their small apartment. If you ask anyone on the team who works for the City of Nashville's Department of General Services, they'll tell you that Maria Lopez is the most dedicated employee they've ever known. She has never called in sick, never complained about her assignments, and never asked for special treatment. Her supervisor might not appreciate her, but her co-workers respect her work ethic and her quiet dignity. What they don't know is that every morning, as Maria pushes her cart through the empty streets, she transforms those lonely hours into something magical. The singing had started as a way to pass the time during those long, solitary hours before the city woke up. At first, Maria had hummed quietly to herself, old Mexican lullabies her mother had sung to her as a child. But gradually, as she became more comfortable with the rhythm of her new life, she began to sing the country songs that had first drawn her to Nashville. There was something about the early morning silence that made her feel safe enough to let her voice soar the way it once had on stage. Music Row at dawn became Maria's private concert hall. The empty streets provided perfect acoustics, and the sleeping city became her audience. She sang Patsy Cline's heartbreak ballads as she swept around the statue commemorating the country music legends. She belted out Dolly Parton's anthems of female empowerment as she emptied trash cans outside the publishing houses. And when she reached the section of the street that housed the studios where Reba Mcentire had recorded some of her greatest hits, Maria always saved the best for last. Fancy had become her signature song during those morning performances. There was something about Reba's story of a young woman rising above her circumstances that resonated deeply with Maria's own journey. When she sang that song, she wasn't just performing. She was living every word, feeling every emotion, and pouring 12 years of deferred dreams into every note. Her voice would echo off the buildings, rich and powerful and full of a longing that could break your heart if you were lucky enough to hear it. Her co-workers had started arriving earlier, just to catch Maria's impromptu concerts. Tommy Williams, a veteran of the sanitation department, often said that Maria's voice was better than anything he heard on the radio. "You should be up there on those stages," he would tell her, pointing to the venues they cleaned around. "Not down here with us." But Maria would just smile and shake her head. Those days were behind her now. She had responsibilities, obligations, a life that didn't allow for such luxuries as dreams. What Maria didn't know was that her voice had been carrying further than she imagined. The acoustics of Music Row were designed to showcase sound, and her early morning performances had been drifting through windows and doorways, reaching ears she never could have suspected. Security guards working the night shift had started timing their rounds to catch portions of her concerts. Early arriving studio engineers had begun opening windows to hear her better. Even some of the artists who occasionally worked late into the night had noticed the hauntingly beautiful voice that seemed to emanate from the streets themselves. But on this particular morning in late October, something was different. Maria had been assigned to work the section of Music Row that included Blackbird Studio, one of Nashville's most prestigious recording facilities. She knew that Reba Mcentire had been spotted going in and out of the building over the past week, working on what rumor suggested was a deeply personal new album. The thought of her idol being so close made Maria's heart race, even though she knew the chances of actually seeing Reba were virtually non-existent. As she began her routine cleaning around the studio, Maria found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. 12 years of rising before dawn, 12 years of putting her dreams aside for her children's needs, 12 years of singing to empty streets instead of packed venues. There were moments when the weight of all those deferred dreams felt crushing, when she wondered what might have been if life had dealt her a different hand. But then she would think of Carlos, now 14 and showing promise as a student and athlete, and Sophia, 12 and already displaying her mother's musical talent, and Maria knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. The morning air was crisp and clean, perfect for singing. Maria began with some vocal warm-ups, her breath creating small clouds in the cool air as she prepared her voice for the performance that no one would witness. She started with a few bars of Coal Miner's Daughter, her voice carrying the authentic emotion of someone who truly understood what it meant to work hard for every dollar. Then she moved into 9 to 5, injecting it with the weariness and determination of someone who had been working those hours for more than a decade. But when she reached the section of sidewalk directly in front of Blackbird's studio, Maria felt compelled to sing the song that had become her signature. Fancy represented everything she had once hoped to become, and everything she had learned to accept about herself. As she began the opening lines, her voice took on a quality that would have made professional vocal coaches weep with admiration. This wasn't just singing, this was storytelling at its most profound level, a woman pouring her entire life experience into 3.5 minutes of music. Inside the studio, Reba Mcentire was having the kind of morning that had become all too familiar in recent months. She had been working on her new album for over a year, and while most of the tracks were completed, there was one song that continued to elude her. The melody was perfect, the lyrics were some of the best she had ever written, but something was missing. Every time she tried to record it, the emotion felt forced, the delivery seemed artificial. Her producer had suggested taking a break, but Reba was nothing if not persistent. She had built her career on refusing to give up when things got difficult. As she sat in the control room, listening to the playback of her latest attempt, Reba felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest. The technical aspects of the performance were flawless. Her voice was strong, the timing was perfect, the production was polished. But it lacked the raw authenticity that had always been the hallmark of her best work. She needed to connect with something real, something that would remind her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. That's when she heard it. The voice that drifted through the studio walls was unlike anything Reba had heard in decades of working in the music industry. It was her own song, Fancy, but being performed with such raw authenticity that it made her question whether she had ever truly understood her own lyrics. The woman singing outside wasn't just performing the song. She was living it, breathing it, making it her own in a way that spoke to experiences Reba could only imagine. Without thinking, Reba stood up from her chair in the control room and moved toward the window. "Who is that?" she whispered to her producer Marcus Chen, who had also stopped what he was doing to listen. Marcus shook his head in amazement, equally captivated by the voice that seemed to be coming from the street itself. The sound system in the studio was state-of-the-art, designed to capture the subtlest nuances in recorded performances, but this voice needed no amplification, no enhancement. It carried naturally through the morning air with a power and clarity that made professional recordings seem artificial by comparison. Outside, Maria was completely lost in the music. Her eyes were closed, her body swaying slightly as she sang, the broom in her hand forgotten as she poured every ounce of her being into the performance. She had sung this song hundreds of times during her morning routine, but today it felt different. There was something in the air, some indefinable energy that made her voice soar higher and dig deeper than ever before. She wasn't just singing about Fancy's transformation from poverty to empowerment. She was channeling her own journey, her own struggles, her own dreams that refused to die despite 12 years of being buried beneath responsibility and routine. The emotion in Maria's voice was so genuine, so unfiltered, that Reba found herself getting chills. This was what had been missing from her own recording session, this connection to the real human experience that the song was meant to represent. Reba had written Fancy years ago as a story of transformation and empowerment, but she had never heard it performed by someone who truly embodied that struggle. The woman outside wasn't performing for an audience or trying to impress anyone. She was singing for herself, for her own soul, and that authenticity was what made it so incredibly powerful. "I have to see who this is," Reba said, moving toward the studio door. Marcus tried to stop her, reminding her that they had a tight schedule and couldn't afford interruptions, but Reba was already walking out of the building. Some things in life were more important than schedules, and she had learned to trust her instincts when it came to recognizing genuine talent. The morning sun was just beginning to cast long shadows across Music Row as Reba stepped outside. She spotted Maria immediately, a woman in a faded city uniform, standing next to a cleaning cart, completely absorbed in her performance. What struck Reba first wasn't just the incredible voice, but the woman's entire presence. There was a dignity in the way she carried herself, a grace that transcended her humble circumstances. This wasn't someone putting on a show or trying to get attention. This was someone expressing her deepest truth through music. Reba found herself moving closer, drawn by the magnetic pull of Maria's performance. She had met thousands of singers in her career, from seasoned professionals to ambitious newcomers, but she had rarely encountered someone who could convey so much authentic emotion through their voice. Maria's interpretation of Fancy was revealing layers of meaning that Reba herself had never fully explored. The way she sang the line about fancy clothes and fine cars wasn't just about material transformation. It was about the dignity that comes from refusing to be defeated by circumstances. As the song reached its climax, Maria's voice soared with a power that seemed to come from someplace deeper than technique or training. This was the voice of someone who had lived through real hardship and emerged stronger. Someone who understood that true transformation comes not from changing your circumstances, but from changing how you see yourself within those circumstances. When she reached the final notes, her voice carried a mixture of triumph and melancholy that perfectly captured the complex emotions of someone who had achieved a different kind of success than she had originally dreamed of. The last note hung in the morning air like a prayer, and for a moment the entire street seemed to hold its breath. That's when Maria opened her eyes and saw Reba Mcentire standing just a few feet away, tears streaming down the country music legend's face. The shock was so complete that Maria's knees nearly buckled. The broom fell from her hands with a clatter that seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "Oh my God," Maria whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Miss Mcentire, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you were there. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Her voice was shaking and she was already bending to pick up her broom, her face flushed with embarrassment. In her mind, she was just a cleaning lady who had been caught doing something inappropriate during work hours. The last thing she wanted was to cause trouble or make anyone uncomfortable, but Reba stepped forward, her own voice thick with emotion. "Please don't apologize," she said, reaching out to gently touch Maria's arm. "That was the most beautiful thing I've heard in years. You have an incredible gift." The sincerity in Reba's voice was unmistakable, and Maria found herself looking into the eyes of her idol, seeing genuine admiration and respect there. "You know my music," Reba continued, and there was wonder in her voice. "But more than that, you understand it. The way you just sang Fancy, that's not just a performance. That's truth. That's what music is supposed to be." Maria felt tears beginning to form in her own eyes. This couldn't be real. Reba Mcentire, the woman whose voice had sustained her through the darkest moments of her life, was standing here, praising her singing. "I've been listening to your music since I was 18, Maria managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your songs got me through some very difficult times. They taught me that it's possible to be strong and vulnerable at the same time." The words came out in a rush, as if she was afraid this moment might disappear if she didn't hurry to express what was in her heart. Reba smiled, and the warmth in that smile made Maria feel like she was talking to an old friend rather than a superstar. "What's your name, honey?" Reba asked, and when Maria told her, she repeated it as if she were committing it to memory. "Maria Lopez. That's a beautiful name. Tell me, do you sing professionally?" The question hit Maria like a physical blow. For a moment, she was transported back 24 years to when she had first arrived in Nashville, when that question would have been met with excitement and hope rather than the crushing weight of reality. "I used to dream about it," she said finally, "but life had other plans. I have 2 children to support, and this job provides steady income and benefits. Dreams are luxuries I can't afford anymore." The sadness in Maria's voice was heartbreaking, but there was no self-pity there, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had made peace with difficult choices. Reba recognized that tone. She had heard it in her own voice during the early years of her career, when she had wondered if she would ever make it, if the sacrifices would ever pay off. "How long have you been working for the city?" Reba asked, and when Maria told her it had been 12 years, Reba's heart ached for all the music that had been silenced during that time. "And you sing out here every morning?" Maria nodded, explaining that it was her way of staying connected to the part of herself that still believed in magic, even if she couldn't pursue it professionally. That's when Reba made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Maria, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer. Would you be willing to let me record you singing? Just on my phone. Nothing fancy. I think the world needs to hear your voice." The request caught Maria completely off guard. The idea of being recorded, of potentially being seen by people beyond her small circle of co-workers and family, was both thrilling and terrifying. "I don't know," Maria said hesitantly. "I'm not sure my supervisor would appreciate me being recorded during work hours, and I'm not really dressed for anything like that." She gestured to her faded uniform and practical work boots, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. But Reba shook her head, her expression serious. "Maria, authenticity can't be dressed up or manufactured. What I just heard, that's real. That's what music is supposed to sound like. The world is full of people who look perfect and sound polished, but they're missing what you have, truth. Raw, honest, beautiful truth." The conviction in Reba's voice was overwhelming, and Maria found herself nodding despite her fears. "Okay," she whispered. "If you really think it might help someone, then yes, I'll do it." What Maria didn't say was that she would have agreed to almost anything Reba asked of her. This woman had been her inspiration for over 2 decades, and if Reba Mcentire thought her voice was worth sharing, then maybe, just maybe, it was. Reba pulled out her phone and positioned herself to capture both Maria and the backdrop of Music Row. "Just sing like you were singing before I came out here," she said gently. "Forget about the camera, forget about everything except the music. Can you do Fancy one more time for me?" Maria took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let the music take her away again. This time, knowing that Reba was listening, Maria's performance took on an even deeper level of emotional authenticity. She sang not just for herself now, but for every woman who had ever had to choose between dreams and responsibilities, for every person who had ever felt invisible, despite having something beautiful to offer the world. Her voice carried across Music Row with a power that seemed to make the very buildings lean in to listen. When the song ended, Reba was crying again, and she wasn't the only one. Several people had emerged from nearby buildings, drawn by the sound of Maria's voice. Marcus, the producer, had come outside and was standing in stunned silence. A few early-arriving musicians and studio workers had stopped their cars to listen. Even some of Maria's co-workers had gathered at the end of the street, grinning with pride at seeing their colleague finally get the recognition they had always known she deserved. "That was perfect," Reba said, her voice thick with emotion. "Maria, I want you to know that what just happened here, this is going to change things. I can feel it." She looked at the video on her phone, then back at Maria. "Would it be okay if I shared this? I think people need to see this, need to hear your story." Maria felt a flutter of fear mixed with excitement. "Are you sure? I mean, who would want to watch a cleaning lady sing?" But Reba's response was immediate and firm. "Everyone, Maria. Everyone needs to see this, because this is what real dreams look like. Not perfect people in perfect circumstances, but real people with real talent, finding ways to keep their spirits alive despite the challenges life throws at them." As Reba spoke, she was already uploading the video to her social media accounts, adding a caption that would soon be read by millions of people around the world. What none of them could have predicted was how quickly and dramatically their lives were about to change. Within hours, the video would be shared thousands of times. Within a day, it would have millions of views. And within a week, it would spark conversations about dreams, dignity, and second chances that would reach far beyond the country music world. But all of that was still to come. In this moment, as Maria watched Reba Mcentire post a video of her singing, she felt something she hadn't experienced in 12 years. Hope. Pure, undiluted hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late for dreams to come true after all. What Maria didn't know was that this moment of hope would soon be tested by forces she never could have anticipated. By noon that same day, Maria's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The video of her singing Fancy with Reba Mcentire had exploded across social media platforms like wildfire. What had started as a simple post on Reba's Instagram account had been shared, reshared, and commented on by thousands of people within hours. News outlets were picking up the story, calling it everything from heartwarming to the most authentic musical moment of the year. Maria's phone, an old device she rarely used except for emergencies, was buzzing constantly with notifications she didn't understand and calls from numbers she didn't recognize. The attention was overwhelming and wonderful at the same time. Messages of support were pouring in from around the world. People were sharing their own stories of deferred dreams and finding inspiration in Maria's journey. Country music fans were calling her voice angelic and the real deal. Music industry professionals were commenting that this was what authentic country music was supposed to sound like. For a few beautiful hours, Maria felt like she was living in a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as Maria had learned long ago, rarely survive contact with harsh reality. And harsh reality came in the form of Deborah Thompson, a supervisor at the Department of General Services, who had spent her lunch break scrolling through social media and growing more furious with each passing minute. Deborah Thompson was a woman who had built her entire identity around control and authority. At 55, she had worked her way up from an entry-level position to supervisor through sheer determination and an unwavering belief that rules existed to be followed without exception. She had never married, had no children, and had devoted her entire adult life to her career with the city. In her mind, the Department of General Services was her kingdom, and every employee under her supervision was expected to maintain the dignity and professionalism she demanded. Deborah had always harbored a particular resentment toward employees like Maria, immigrants who, in her view, should be grateful for any opportunity America had given them rather than harboring dreams above their station. She had watched Maria's quiet competence over the years with a mixture of grudging respect and deep suspicion. There was something about Maria's dignity, her refusal to be broken by circumstances, that Deborah found personally threatening. It reminded her of dreams she herself had once harbored and abandoned, and she resented being reminded of that failure. When Deborah first saw the video, her initial reaction was disbelief. Surely this couldn't be one of her employees making a spectacle of herself during work hours. But as she watched Maria's performance and read the thousands of positive comments, her disbelief transformed into rage. In Deborah's mind, Maria had violated the most basic principles of employment. She had used city time and city property for personal gain, and worse, she had done so without permission. The fact that the video was being celebrated around the world only made Deborah angrier. She saw it as validation of everything she had always suspected about Maria, that the woman thought she was too good for her job, that she was using her position as a stepping stone to something better. The idea that one of her employees might actually escape the life Deborah had resigned herself to was unbearable. Maria had no idea what was coming when she arrived at work the next morning. She was still floating on the euphoria of the previous day's events, still trying to process the overwhelming response to the video. Several of her co-workers had congratulated her, and she had received calls from her children's teachers saying how proud the kids must be of their mother. For the first time in 12 years, Maria felt like something beautiful was happening in her life. That feeling lasted exactly 17 minutes into her shift. "Lopez!" Deborah's voice cut through the early morning air like a knife. "My office, now!" The tone was so sharp, so filled with barely contained fury, that Maria's stomach immediately dropped. She had heard Deborah use that voice before, usually right before someone was written up or fired, but surely this couldn't be about the video. Everyone had been so supportive, so excited for her. Deborah's office was a small, cramped space that reflected its occupant's personality. Everything was organized to the point of obsession, and there wasn't a single personal touch anywhere to be seen. Deborah sat behind her desk, like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence, her face twisted with an expression of disgust that made Maria's blood run cold. "Sit down," Deborah commanded, not looking up from the paperwork she was shuffling. Maria took the chair across from the desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched for what felt like hours before Deborah finally spoke. "I suppose you think you're some kind of celebrity now," Deborah said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I suppose you think that little performance yesterday makes you special." She finally looked up, and the hatred in her eyes was so intense that Maria actually flinched. "I don't understand," Maria said quietly. "I thought people enjoyed the video. I didn't think I was doing anything wrong." But Deborah's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Didn't think you were doing anything wrong. You used city time to make yourself famous. You performed for cameras while you were supposed to be working. You made a mockery of this department and everything we stand for." Each word was delivered like a physical blow, and Maria felt her earlier joy crumbling away like sand. "But I was just singing while I worked," Maria protested. "I always sing while I work. It doesn't interfere with my duties." She knew she was pleading now, but she couldn't help herself. This job was her lifeline, her family's security. She couldn't afford to lose it. "Your duties," Deborah repeated mockingly, "are to clean streets, not to entertain tourists and celebrities. Your duties are to represent this department with dignity and professionalism, not to draw attention to yourself like some kind of street performer." She stood up and began pacing behind her desk, her anger growing with each word. "But, Ms. Thompson, I've never had any complaints about my work. I've never missed a day, never been late, never had any disciplinary issues." Maria's voice was getting smaller, but she had to try to defend herself. Too much was at stake to simply accept this treatment without fighting back. "And that's supposed to impress me?" Deborah snapped. "That's the bare minimum of what I expect from every employee. You don't get special treatment just because you can carry a tune." She stopped pacing and leaned across her desk, her face inches from Maria's. "Let me make something very clear to you, Lopez. You are a cleaning lady. That's all you are, and that's all you'll ever be. This fantasy about being a singer is pathetic at your age." The words hit Maria like physical blows. She had endured a lot of hardship in her life, but having her dreams called pathetic by someone in authority over her was particularly cruel. Still, she tried to maintain her dignity. "I never said I wanted to quit my job. I've always been grateful for this position. The singing was just something that happened naturally." "Naturally?" Deborah's voice rose to a near shout. "There's nothing natural about drawing attention to yourself when you should be working quietly and professionally. Do you have any idea how this makes the department look? Do you care at all about the reputation of the people who gave you a chance when probably nobody else would?" That last comment revealed the ugly prejudice that had always lurked beneath Deborah's professional facade. Maria felt something shift inside her, a flame of anger that she had been suppressing for years beginning to kindle. "What exactly do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. "You know exactly what I mean," Deborah said with a cruel smile. "People like you should be grateful for any opportunity you get in this country. Instead, you're trying to use your job as a platform for personal fame. It's disgraceful." The naked bigotry in those words was shocking in its boldness, and Maria realized that this wasn't really about work performance or department policy. This was about something much darker and more personal. "I am grateful," Maria said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm grateful every day for the opportunity to work and support my family, but that doesn't mean I have to accept being treated with disrespect or having my character attacked." She stood up, matching Deborah's aggressive posture. "And it certainly doesn't mean I have to listen to comments about people like me, as if being Mexican makes me less deserving of basic human dignity." Deborah's face turned red with rage. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone she considered beneath her. "How dare you?" she hissed. "How dare you turn this into something it's not? This is about your unprofessional behavior, nothing else." "Is it?" Maria asked, her fear transforming into righteous anger. "Because it sounds like it's about you not being able to stand the idea that someone you look down on might have something beautiful to offer the world. It sounds like you're threatened by the possibility that dreams don't have expiration dates or immigration status requirements." The confrontation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Tommy Williams, Maria's longtime co-worker and friend, poked his head in with an expression of concern. "Sorry to interrupt, but Maria's got some visitors out here asking for her. Says they're from a radio station." Deborah's face went from red to purple. The idea that Maria was receiving even more attention right here at the workplace was more than she could bear. "Tell them she's busy," Deborah snapped, "and tell them this is a workplace, not a talent agency." But Maria was already moving toward the door. "Actually, I'm on my break in 5 minutes. I can speak with them then." She turned back to Deborah with a look of quiet defiance. "Unless, of course, you're planning to fire me for taking my legally mandated break time." The standoff stretched for a long moment, and Maria could see the wheels turning in Deborah's head. Firing her right now, especially with media attention focused on the situation, would look exactly like what it was: retaliation for something that had brought positive attention to the city. But Deborah wasn't finished with her revenge. "You have 15 minutes, Deborah said through gritted teeth. "And Lopez, this conversation isn't over, not by a long shot." The threat in her voice was unmistakable, and Maria knew that her brief moment of standing up for herself had probably made things much worse. But she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible to win. As Maria walked out of the office to meet with the radio reporters, She had no idea that this confrontation was only the beginning. Deborah Thompson had spent her entire career building a small kingdom where she held absolute power, and she wasn't about to let anyone, especially not someone she considered beneath her, challenge that authority. What neither woman knew was that their confrontation had been witnessed by more people than they realized, and that the story of Maria's treatment was about to become as viral as her singing had been. The fairy tale was far from over, but it was about to take a very dark turn before it could find its way back to the light. The radio interview had gone better than Maria could have hoped. The reporters from Nashville's most popular country music station had been respectful, interested in her story, and genuinely moved by her journey. They had asked about her children, her dreams, and how it felt to meet Reba Mcentire. For 30 minutes, Maria had felt like her story mattered, like she was more than just an invisible city worker whose existence barely registered to most people who passed her on the street. But as she walked back toward the building to return to work, Maria could see Deborah Thompson standing at the window of her office, watching with an expression that promised nothing good. The brief respite from her supervisor's wrath was clearly over, and Maria steeled herself for whatever new humiliation awaited her. What she didn't expect was to find her entire work crew gathered in the break room, their faces a mixture of excitement and concern. Tommy Williams was the first to speak when she entered. "Maria, you need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "It's all over the internet." The video Tommy showed her made Maria's blood run cold. Someone had recorded her confrontation with Deborah through the office window, capturing audio through the thin walls. The exchange had been posted on social media with the caption, "This is how Nashville treats its hidden talents. Watch a supervisor destroy a woman's spirit just hours after she went viral." The video already had hundreds of thousands of views and thousands of comments, most of them expressing outrage at Deborah's treatment of Maria. "Oh no," Maria whispered, sinking into a chair. "This is going to make everything so much worse." She could already imagine Deborah's fury when she discovered that their private confrontation had become public. The woman had been barely contained before. This would push her completely over the edge. "Maybe not," said Carmen Rodriguez, another member of their cleaning crew. "Look at these comments, Maria. People are furious about how you were treated. They're saying the city should investigate, that this supervisor should be fired for discrimination." Carmen scrolled through hundreds of supportive messages, people sharing their own stories of workplace harassment and calling for justice for Maria. But Maria knew Deborah better than the well-meaning strangers on the internet did. She knew that public pressure would only make the woman more determined to assert her authority, more creative in her cruelty. "You don't understand," Maria said quietly. "She has the power to make my life miserable in ways that won't show up on any video. She can change my schedule, give me the worst assignments, write me up for things that other people get away with. I need this job. I can't afford to lose it." The weight of her situation was crushing. For a brief, shining moment, it had seemed like good things were finally happening to her. The video with Reba had brought joy and hope into her life, had reminded her that dreams don't always die even when they're buried deep. But now that moment of beauty was being twisted into something ugly, used as a weapon against her by someone who seemed to take pleasure in crushing spirits. Tommy put a protective arm around Maria's shoulders. "We're not going to let her destroy you," he said firmly. "All of us have seen how hard you work, how professional you are. If she tries anything, we'll all speak up for you." The other crew members nodded in agreement, but Maria could see the worry in their eyes. They all knew that Deborah could make life difficult for anyone who crossed her, and they had families to support too. Before anyone could say more, Deborah's voice cut through the break room like a blade. "Break time is over," she announced from the doorway, her eyes fixed on Maria with naked hatred. "Lopez, I need to see you again now." The way she said it made it clear that this was not a request. As Maria followed Deborah back to the office, she could feel her co-workers' concerned gazes following her. She tried to draw strength from their support, but the fear in her stomach was growing stronger with each step. Deborah closed the office door with more force than necessary and turned to face Maria with an expression of pure venom. "So now you're a victim, is that it?" Deborah said, without preamble. "Now you're going to cry discrimination because I dared to hold you accountable for your unprofessional behavior." She had clearly seen the viral video of their confrontation, and her fury had reached dangerous levels. "I didn't post that video," Maria said quietly. "I had nothing to do with it." But Deborah wasn't interested in the truth. "Of course you didn't," she said sarcastically. "It just magically appeared online. You and your little fan club are trying to destroy my reputation, aren't you? Trying to make me look like the villain in your pathetic little story." She began pacing again, her movements sharp and aggressive. "That's not true," Maria protested. "I just want to do my job and support my family. I never wanted any of this attention." But even as she said it, Maria realized that wasn't entirely accurate. Part of her had loved the recognition, had treasured those moments when her voice and her story had mattered to people. Was that so wrong? "Liar," Deborah spat. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You probably planned that little performance just hoping someone would see you. You used this department, used your position here, to launch your pathetic attempt at fame." Her voice was rising again, and Maria could see spittle forming at the corners of her mouth. "Even if that were true, which it isn't, would it really be so terrible?" Maria found herself saying. "Would it be so awful if someone like me dared to hope for something better? Would it be such a crime if I wanted my children to see that dreams don't have to die just because life gets hard?" The questions seemed to hit Deborah like physical blows, her face contorted with rage. But there was something else there too, something that looked almost like pain. "Dreams?" she screamed. "Dreams are for people who can afford them. Dreams are luxury items that people like you have no business entertaining. You want to know what dreams get you? They get you disappointed, bitter, and alone." The raw emotion in Deborah's voice revealed more than she probably intended. Maria suddenly understood that this wasn't really about work policies or professional behavior. This was about a woman who had given up on her own dreams so completely that she couldn't bear to see anyone else pursue theirs. This was about someone who had become so bitter about her own compromises that the sight of hope in others felt like a personal attack. "What happened to your dreams?" Maria asked gently, and for just a moment, Deborah's mask slipped completely. "I wanted to be a teacher," Deborah whispered, the fight going out of her voice temporarily. "I wanted to inspire children, to make a difference. But my family needed money and I took this job thinking it would be temporary. That was 35 years ago." The vulnerability in her voice was heartbreaking, but it only lasted a moment before the anger returned full force. "And you know what I learned?" Deborah continued, her voice hardening again. "I learned that life doesn't care about your dreams. I learned that the sooner you accept your place in the world, the less it hurts when reality crushes you. I'm trying to save you from that pain, Lopez. I'm trying to teach you that people like us don't get fairy tale endings." "But what if you're wrong?" Maria asked. "What if some of us do get second chances? What if it's never too late to become who we were meant to be?" The hope in her voice seemed to infuriate Deborah even more. "You want to find out?" Deborah said, her voice dangerous now. "Fine. Let's see how your fairy tale holds up in the real world. You're being transferred to the night shift, effective immediately. You'll be working alone, cleaning the industrial district. No more Music Row, no more chances for impromptu performances. Your schedule will be 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. 7 days a week. Let's see how your dreams survive when you never see your children awake." Maria felt the blood drain from her face. The night shift was punishment duty, usually reserved for employees with serious disciplinary problems. Working those hours would mean never being home when Carlos and Sophia were awake, never being able to help with homework or attend school events. It would effectively end her life as she knew it. "You can't do that," Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. They both knew that Deborah could do exactly that, and that any complaint would be met with official justifications about operational needs and schedule requirements. "I can, and I will," Deborah said with satisfaction. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer to resign. I'm sure with all this newfound fame, you won't have any trouble finding another job." The suggestion was clearly meant to be sarcastic, but something in Deborah's tone suggested she actually hoped Maria would quit, would simply disappear, and stop reminding her of the dreams she had abandoned. Maria stood up slowly, her mind racing. She could quit and try to find something else, but without references from her current job, and with the viral video potentially making her seem like a troublemaker to future employers, finding new work might be impossible. She could accept the night shift and watch her relationship with her children slowly disintegrate, or she could fight back, knowing that doing so might cost her everything. Before she could make that decision, there was another knock on the office door. This time it was Janet Morrison from Human Resources, looking uncomfortable and official. "Ms. Thompson, I need to speak with you about some complaints that have been filed regarding this situation." Deborah's confident expression flickered for just a moment. What kind of complaints? Multiple complaints about harassment, discrimination, and retaliation, Janet said quietly. The mayor's office has also received calls about this situation. I'm afraid we need to conduct a full investigation. She looked at Maria with sympathy. Ms. Lopez, you're not to be transferred or have your duties changed until this investigation is complete. For the first time since this nightmare began, Maria felt a spark of hope. Maybe the people supporting her online weren't just offering empty words. Maybe sometimes when enough voices spoke up together, they could actually create change. But as she looked at Deborah's face, now twisted with rage and something that looked like desperation, Maria realized that this victory might be temporary. Women like Deborah didn't give up easily, and they were dangerous when cornered. The real battle was just beginning. 3 days after the Human Resources investigation began, Maria was sitting in her small apartment, staring at her phone with a mixture of disbelief and terror. The story of her treatment at work had exploded far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. Major news networks were covering it, celebrities were commenting on it, and the hashtag #JusticeForMaria was trending nationally. But with all the attention came an overwhelming pressure that she wasn't sure she could handle. Her children, Carlos and Sofia, had been fielding questions from classmates and teachers about their suddenly famous mother. Carlos, now 14 and fiercely protective, had gotten into a fight with a boy who made cruel comments about Maria being just a cleaning lady who thinks she's special. Sofia, 12 and more sensitive, had been crying herself to sleep, worried that all the attention would somehow take her mother away from her. "Mama," Sofia said, curling up next to Maria on their worn sofa, "are you going to leave us to become a famous singer?" The question broke Maria's heart. After everything they had been through together, after all the sacrifices she had made, her daughter was afraid that success might separate their family. "Mi amor," Maria said, pulling Sofia close, "nothing in this world could ever make me leave you and your brother. You two are my life, my everything. Any dream I have that doesn't include you isn't worth pursuing." She kissed the top of Sofia's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her daughter's shampoo. "All I want is to keep working, keep taking care of our family, and maybe sing a little when I can. That's enough for me." But even as she said those words, Maria couldn't deny the small flame of hope that continued to burn in her chest. The messages of support from strangers around the world had reminded her that her voice mattered, that her story had value. For the first time in 12 years, she was remembering what it felt like to believe in possibilities. That's when her phone rang, with a number she didn't recognize. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail. She had received dozens of calls from reporters and curiosity seekers in recent days, but something made her answer this one. "Hello, Maria. This is Reba Mcentire." Maria nearly dropped the phone. In all the chaos of the past few days, she had wondered if Reba had seen the negative aftermath of their beautiful morning encounter. She had worried that the country music legend might regret getting involved with someone who had become the center of such controversy. "Ms. Mcentire," Maria managed to say, "I'm so sorry about all of this mess. I never wanted any trouble to come from that video. If I had known what would happen, I never would have agreed to be recorded." "Maria, stop right there." Reba's voice was firm but warm. "You have nothing to apologize for. I've been following this story, and I am absolutely disgusted by how you've been treated. That supervisor of yours should be ashamed of herself." There was real anger in Reba's voice, the kind of protective fury that comes from someone who has experienced injustice herself. "I just don't understand why she hates me so much," Maria said, tears starting to fall. "I've always done my job well. I've never caused any problems. I just don't understand what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong, honey," Reba said gently. "Some people are so threatened by other people's light that they try to dim it any way they can. But Maria, I didn't call just to check on you. I called because I want to do something about this situation. Would you be willing to meet with me tomorrow?" Maria's heart started racing. "Of course, but I have to work tomorrow. I can't afford to miss any more time, especially with the investigation going on." The practical realities of her life always had to come first, no matter how much she might want to drop everything to meet with her idol. "Actually," Reba said, and Maria could hear the smile in her voice, "I was thinking of coming to see you. At work. Is that something you'd be comfortable with?" Before Maria could answer, there was a knock at her apartment door. Carlos went to answer it and returned with a confused expression. "Mom, there's a lady here from some foundation." She says she wants to talk to you about the situation at work. Maria covered the phone. Tell her I'm not interested in any interviews or publicity, she called out. But Carlos shook his head. She's not a reporter. She says she's a lawyer, and she's offering to help for free. The woman in question appeared behind Carlos, a professional-looking African-American woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a determined expression. Ms. Lopez, I'm Sandra Williams from the Civil Rights Legal Foundation, the woman said. I've been following your story, and I believe you have a strong case for workplace discrimination and retaliation. I'd like to represent you pro bono if you're interested. Maria was overwhelmed. Ms. Mcentire, I need to call you back, she said into the phone. Actually, hold on just a minute, Reba said. Is that Sandra Williams? I know Sandra. She's done incredible work fighting workplace discrimination. Maria, I think you should listen to what she has to say. Over the next hour, Sandra explained that Maria's case was exactly the kind of situation her organization existed to address. The evidence was overwhelming. The viral video of Deborah's discriminatory comments, witness statements from co-workers, and a clear pattern of retaliation following Maria's moment of positive publicity. More importantly, Sandra believed they could not only protect Maria's job, but also ensure that other employees wouldn't face similar treatment in the future. But what if I lose? Maria asked. What if fighting back just makes everything worse? The fear was real. She had been powerless for so long that the idea of standing up to authority felt impossibly dangerous. Maria, Sandra said gently, sometimes the greatest risk is not taking any risk at all. Your children are watching how you handle this situation. Do you want them to learn that they should accept injustice quietly, or do you want them to see that their mother was brave enough to fight for what's right? The question hit Maria like a lightning bolt. She thought about Carlos, brilliant and ambitious, who deserved to believe that hard work and talent would be rewarded regardless of his background. She thought about Sophia, sensitive and musical, who needed to see that dreams were worth pursuing even when the path was difficult. What kind of mother would she be if she taught them to accept discrimination without resistance? Okay, Maria said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Let's fight. The next morning, Maria arrived at work to find the Department of General Services building, surrounded by news trucks and protesters holding signs reading, "Justice for Maria and dreams don't have expiration dates." The support was overwhelming and terrifying at the same time. She had never wanted to be the center of a movement, but sometimes history chooses ordinary people for extraordinary moments. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Deborah was notably absent. Rumors suggested she had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. Janet Morrison from Human Resources met Maria with a nervous smile and explained that there would be some special circumstances to her workday. What kind of special circumstances? Maria asked. But before Janet could answer, Tommy Williams appeared with the biggest grin she had ever seen on his face. Maria, you need to come outside, he said. Trust me, you're going to want to see this. Confused but curious, Maria followed Tommy back outside where she discovered that the crowd of supporters had grown even larger. But what made her gasp was the sight of a familiar figure stepping out of a black SUV, flanked by what appeared to be her management team and a small army of security personnel. Reba Mcentire had come to Nashville's Department of General Services. The crowd erupted in cheers as Reba made her way toward the building, stopping to shake hands with supporters and speak briefly with reporters. But her eyes were scanning the crowd, clearly looking for someone specific. When she spotted Maria standing frozen in the doorway, her face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire city. There she is, Reba called out, her voice carrying clearly across the crowd. There's the woman with the voice that reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. The crowd cheered even louder as Reba made her way toward Maria, but what happened next surprised everyone, including Maria herself. Instead of stopping for photos or media opportunities, Reba walked directly to Maria and pulled her into a warm, genuine embrace. I told you I was coming to see you at work, she whispered in Maria's ear. I hope you don't mind that I brought a few friends. What Maria didn't know was that Reba had spent the past 3 days making phone calls, pulling strings, and using every bit of influence she had accumulated over decades in the music industry. The few friends she had brought included the mayor of Nashville, the head of the city council, and several other country music stars who had been moved by Maria's story. Ladies and gentlemen, Reba addressed the crowd, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded stages for decades. "I came here today because I witnessed something beautiful. A woman with an incredible gift, sharing that gift with the world while doing honest work to support her family. What I've learned since then is that this beautiful moment was turned into something ugly by someone who couldn't stand to see another person's light shine." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Maria felt like she was living in a dream, not just because her idol was speaking about her to hundreds of people, but because someone with real power was choosing to use that power to defend her. "Maria Lopez doesn't just have a beautiful voice," Reba continued. "She has something much rarer. She has authenticity, dignity, and the kind of grace that comes from facing hardship without becoming bitter. Those are the qualities that make great artists. But more importantly, they're the qualities that make great human beings." Reba turned to face Maria directly. "I have a proposition for you, if you're interested. My label is looking for artists who have something real to say, people whose voices carry the weight of genuine experience. I'd like to offer you a recording contract." The crowd exploded in cheers, but Maria felt the world spinning around her. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like her. "I don't understand," she whispered. "It's simple," Reba said with a smile. "I want to help you make an album. I want the world to hear that incredible voice of yours paired with songs that tell your story. But more than that, I want to help you show your children that dreams really can come true, even when they take a different path than we originally planned." Through her tears, Maria looked out at the crowd of supporters, at her co-workers cheering and crying, at the reporters documenting this impossible moment. She thought about Carlos and Sofia, who would see their mother not as someone who accepted injustice quietly, but as someone who had found the courage to stand up and fight back. She thought about Deborah Thompson, whose bitterness had ultimately backfired in the most spectacular way possible. But mostly, she thought about that 18-year-old girl who had arrived in Nashville with nothing but dreams and determination, and she realized that sometimes the universe just takes a longer route to deliver what was always meant to be yours. "Yes," Maria said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I would love that opportunity." 6 months later, Maria Lopez's debut album, Second Chances, topped the country music charts and earned her a Grammy nomination. The album's title track, co-written with Reba Mcentire, became an anthem for anyone who had ever been told their dreams were too big or their time had passed. Deborah Thompson was quietly transferred to a different department after sensitivity training, and the city implemented new policies to prevent workplace discrimination. But perhaps the most beautiful outcome was that Maria never had to choose between her dreams and her family. Her recording schedule was built around her children's needs, and Carlos and Sofia became regular fixtures at their mother's concerts, watching with pride as she proved that sometimes the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. And every morning as Maria drove through Nashville to drop her children at school before heading to the recording studio, she still sometimes sang along to the radio, remembering the woman who used to clean these streets while dreaming of something more. The difference was that now, those dreams had found their way home.